Hello everyone and welcome back to me, Shiva Wilson, and my channel, which at the moment is about whatever comes to my mind that I think is worth sharing. Well, today I have a piece of semi-autobiographical creative non-fiction for you called Crystal Iron Man, which details my journey from well-housed to homeless and psychotic, believing I was a spiritual superhero. It's technically a very short story, but it will make a big video, so I'm going to release it in parts first, then all together as one big video later. So without further ado, I present to you Crystal Iron Man. Names have been changed to preserve people's identities. When did it all begin? It began on September 10th, 2019, when Fieros tidied up the incredibly messy study and put one of his mum's bank statements in the waste paper basket. He had done it on purpose to provoke his mum into tidying the study, but instead it provoked her to violence. Fieros and Jane woke up to Fieros's mum, Cynthia, ranting and raving downstairs. Fieros went down and his mum confronted him about the bank statement. She said not to touch her bank statements because they had to be kept for 6 years for tax reasons. Fieros said that the mess had reached insane proportions. His mum flared with anger, screwed up her face, swirled around and punched Fieros in his left arm. Fieros immediately called the police on 999 and soon enough they arrived to take statements. Fieros's mum, Cynthia, was arrested and taken off in the police car to the station to sit in a cell and answer questions. Fieros and Jane went cycling off to the mental health facility in Slough called New Horizons, but were turned away from any help. Apparently they needed to be referred there by a GP to get any help. They rode back home and waited. Fieros's mum was in the jail cell for around 8 hours. Fieros and Jane were told to jog on by the police officer who brought back Cynthia, as she wasn't willing to have them living at 39B anymore. Cynthia had part lied, part forgotten the truth during the police interview and had said she had pushed past Fieros and not punched him. The police didn't press any charges against Cynthia. Fieros and Jane went to the woods at the end of the road and Fieros called around his friends to see if anyone could help. His friend Philip said they could stay with him and Dave for a few days and that he'd be round to pick them up soon. Fieros and Jane were grateful for the hospitality and waited for Philip to pick them up. They looked around the woods and wondered what lay in store ahead. Philip arrived after half an hour or so and Fieros and Jane got in the Ford Focus and were whisked off to Phil and Dave's in Staines. Fieros and Jane could stay in Dave's room as he was fortunately away on holiday. Dave's room was adequately sized and had a throbbing, peaceful energy inside it, which seemed to emanate from the glowing overhead lamp in the centre of the room. Fieros called his weed dealer and arranged for an 8th to be delivered. When it arrived, out of shame, Fieros jumped out of Dave's window to go meet Jack, the dealer, and picked up the bag of weed. Later, Fieros confessed to Phil and explained that he just felt bad about it, so he tried to hide his consumption from Phil. Phil didn't seem to mind. Fieros, Jane and Phil watched TV, ate chicken nuggets and chips, drank a few beers and played video games, and temporarily all was well. When the night was over, Fieros and Jane made love on Dave's bed, the throbbing orange light above cradling them in a peaceful womb. Afterwards, they wondered about their fate now that they couldn't go back to 39B. No ideas were forthcoming about where they could stay when Phil and Dave's hospitality ran out. No matter, Phil had to go see a mutual friend, Fieros's former employer, Chris Black, about some money that was owed him. Chris Black was a man with connections and fingers in every sort of council pie imaginable, so Fieros and Jane welcomed the swift journey to the Riverside Canoe Association's headquarters to talk to his former boss about their current homelessness situation. They weren't allowed to stay at Phil and Dave's house unattended anyway, so off they went with Phil down to the Jubilee Riverside in Slough. Chris Black had last been seen by Fieros dunking Ganeshes into the river on some sort of Hindu holiday. According to Chris, that was the way the statues went to heaven. For that reason, Fieros saw Chris Black as a Ganesh unto himself, a remover of obstacles, and Fieros felt glad to have the counsel of such a man in this time of need. Chris Black said that Fieros should play the mental health card as a way to get help from Slough Borough Council for housing, and he made a few calls on their behalf, but nothing specific was forthcoming. Phil got his money, and Fieros and Jane chatted to Chris Black about their housing situation. Then they left and went back to Staines. After 3 days staying at Phil and Dave's in Staines, Fieros finally came up with the miraculous idea to stay at a guest house he knew of in Slough, near 39B, asking Jane to put up her £600 savings to pay for it. Jane agreed, and Phil dutifully drove Fieros and Jane off to Slough, where they touched down in the Sussex Lodge, nicknamed for all eternity as the Sex Lodge. Jane had enough money for 3 weeks' stay in the guest house, so they settled in while they figured and tried their best to come up with a longer-term solution. Nothing was forthcoming, except that Fieros had a vision of the dove of peaceful prosperity whilst he was getting stoned in the wardrobe of their Sussex Lodge guest room. Stardog was the strain that the local dealer was peddling, and it had a certain kind of high that lent itself to high ideas, coming from the stars and dogs. The dove of peaceful prosperity had descended upon Fieros and Jane, as well as another idea, God's wallet. God's wallet was an idea that presented itself to Fieros and inspired his financial abundance sensibilities. Fieros had been blessed with the idea of an abundance of free money coming from God, and it was symbolized in the idea of God's wallet. Where did all the money in the world come from? God's wallet. God's wallet was fat and available and would never dry up. Fieros walked across the nearby fields with a big fat Stardog spliff in his mouth, smiling, avoiding the wasps' nests in the hedges, and went to sit down by his favourite meditation tree. It was a really big spliff, and as such it prompted some deep and strong mental images to arise in Fieros' mind. He saw thousands of years' worth of evolution stream through his internal vision, and mainly what came to mind was mushrooms. Mushrooms had governed and steered the evolution of mankind for ages before, and presumably ages to come. Sadly, there were no edible mushrooms around. Oh well. Fieros and Jane stayed for 3 weeks in the sex lodge before Jane's money ran out. On the day that they were to leave, Fieros had been giving £55 from his granny as part of his regular family-based financial grants, which was £130 per week total at a composite of £55, £45 and £30 from his granny, his dad and his mum respectively. Fieros, in a moment of desperation and prescience, walked the 5-minute walk to Sainsbury's near the A4 roundabout, marched up to the Argos terminal situated near the front of the Sainsbury's store, and typed in tents. In a stroke of the miraculous, Fieros found that there was a 2-man tent available for £54.99, so immediately he bought it, took it off to the nearby Upton Court Park, and found the secret spot he'd been reconnaissancing for some time. The secret spot was hidden behind a wall of trees and bushes in the heart of the field-type park. Fieros set up the tent, still in a state of utter desperation and agony, smoked a spliff and drank a bottle of rum all to himself, cried in terror and blacked out. Meanwhile, Jane was tidying up their room in the sex lodge. It turned out that much of their stuff had been stolen during the changeover process, but Jane took all the stuff she could and went over to the tent in the secret spot in Upton Court Park. When Jane arrived, Fieros was already drunk and stoned. They hugged a long, desperate hug and cried in fear of what was to become of them. They were now officially homeless, living on the edge, hardly any money nor resources to their names. To begin with, the woods were good to Fieros and Jane, providing shelter from the outside world due to its secluded nature. They made campfires every night, smoked weed and drank cider to keep warm. The money from Fieros's granny kept them afloat, just enough to buy weed, food and cider, but Fieros knew it wouldn't last forever. The rest of his family had cut him off, so £55 per week was all they had. Luckily, Fieros and Jane had gone to Slough Borough Council and had procured vouchers for Sainsbury's to the tune of £135, so they had enough to eat for a little while. And that's the end of that chapter. That's part 1 of Crystal Iron Man. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next part. Good night.